I'm Soroush.
Hello.
Sweet. Our story starts in a small Italian restaurant in the Lower East Side. I was hanging out with some friends, and they had on some Pandora station, and they kept playing bands like Audioslave and Soundgarden. And inevitably, the conversation turned to Chris Cornell, who's the lead singer of both of those bands. He was actually mentioned in the keynote yesterday as well. And Chris Cornell's done a lot of cool stuff, one of which is having the honor of having made the theme song for the second best Bond movie ever. And Bond has become sort of an integral part of the Apple community, probably in no small part due to this guy. And while a lot of artists have made Bond theme songs, only one has made a Grammy Award-winning track sampling a Bond theme song. Since everything in my life keeps coming back to Kanye West, that's what this talk is about as well. Kanye is a huge lowercase a artist, and I think he's an incredibly important capital A artist as well. Kanye West motivates me. And when I tell people that, the reaction is always the same. It's either shock or laughter. And it makes sense, because Kanye can be a brash character sometimes. But he has a lot of qualities that endear him to me, and I'd like to make the case for those qualities to y'all today. Kanye is actually pretty easy to treat as a role model because he wears his heart on his sleeve all the time. That's an awesome quality to have in a role model, not only because it gives you access into the mind of that person, but also honesty is just a great trait. It's a very admirable trait to have in a person anyway. And so today we're going to use Kanye West as a lens to analyze 5 different values, and we're going to meet a familiar character along the way. So Kanye, this is Kanye's first album, College Dropout. And a little bit of backstory, Kanye had been, he'd always wanted to be a rapper, but he had been finding good work being a producer instead. And so College Dropout ends with a track which has 3 verses of rapping, and then ends with 9 minutes of monologue about how he got his record deal and how this album came to be made. And so Kanye had been working as a producer for a number of years before that. And a producer sort of provides the spirit of a song. And Kanye had a really unique sound. He would take old Motown and soul records from his mom's attic, he would speed them up, and he would add drums, and he would sell that as a beat. Now that might seem simple, but it was a really revolutionary sound. It was a sound that hip-hop really needed at the time. So during this 9-minute monologue, Kanye tells a story of how he found himself in the studio with Jay-Z and couldn't resist showing off a little bit. So he says in this monologue, "I said, yo, Jay, I could rap. And I spit this rap that said, killing y'all on that lyrical shit, mayonnaise-colored Benz, I push miracle whips." Now, a whip is another term for a car, and so we got a great pun here. But he continues, and I saw his eyes light up when I said that line. But you know, the rest of the rap was like real whack and shit, so that's all the response. He said, "Man, that was tight." That was it. Kanye didn't get a deal. He thought that he could just put himself in the room with the right person and say the right thing and make his record deal happen. And while history has shown that Kanye can be both a very competent producer and rapper, kickstarting both of those careers at the same time proved to be infeasible. Now, this story is interesting on its own, but where it becomes really cool is how it parallels Steve Jobs' own story. I'm sure this audience needs no introduction, but Steve Jobs was pushed out of Apple in 1985. He wasn't really mature enough to handle the company. And so he left. He started Next. He spun off Pixar from Lucasfilm. And in 1997, he convinced Apple to bring him back and put him in as CEO of Apple, and that kicked off the next era of their history. And with both Jobs and Kanye, you get this sense that they took this sort of circuitous route to get where they were going, but they both knew where they wanted to be. And so I think that's the first lesson that we can draw from Kanye West, which is to start small. Start with something bite-sized, something you can really sink your teeth into before moving on to the next thing. Get really good at that before you move on to the next thing. Whether the next thing is being the biggest rapper in the industry or the biggest company in the world. So, College Dropout. College Dropout came out in 2004, in February of 2004. but the album actually leaked the summer before. And nowadays, when an album leaks, the artist or the label will usually rush to put it on iTunes to sort of try to capture some of that revenue. They figure as long as people are going to get their hands on it, they might as well provide a legal way to do that and make some money in the process. But in 2003, Kanye knew that College Dropout wasn't ready. And so he took the feedback from the forums that were discussing the leak and the blogs that were reviewing the leak, and he took that feedback and he reworked the album. He added some tracks, he dropped others. And it's actually a good thing because if you listen to the leak, it's kind of weird, it's not very good. And so he took his album, he reworked it, and then he released it that February in 2004, and it was a smash hit. It went platinum multiple times, it was nominated for like 10 Grammys, and he even took home a few. And so that is, I think, the second lesson that we can take from Kanye West, which is to make good stuff. Kanye values polish and perfection, and he never compromises on his art. Another great example of this is this song, All the Lights. Kanye spent 2 years working on this song, a 5-minute pop song being worked on for 2 years. It's crazy. All those artists are all featured on the track. It's the most features I've ever seen on a track, and it is crazy. These are the credits for the song, and you can see all the different people that are doing vocals on it. Ellie Jackson is from the band LaRue. Elton John sings on this track, which is, I've never heard his voice, but he's in there somewhere. Not only does he sing, but he also plays the piano. Kanye is known for using 808 drum kits in his songs. But look at all these instruments, flute, trombone, cello. This is a total tour de force. 2 years being spent on a 5-minute pop song. And who else liked to spend a long time polishing a product before delivering it? Apple started work on the iPad in 2002, back when computers looked like the Cybook. And the prototypes of the iPad didn't really look much different. And they took 8 years to polish that and to turn that into something that was awesome. And that's what excellence looks like. And I'm going to dip into the ridiculous here for a little bit, because it's impossible to talk about Kanye without touching on the absurd. I specifically ordered Persian rugs with cherub imagery. What do I have to do to get a simple Persian rug with cherub imagery? Ugh. It's so easy to make fun of this. But I think that the perfectionism that drives songs like All the Lights and products like the iPad is the same thing that drives this behavior. Because let's not forget, Steve Jobs had his extravagances too. This bit is from the Walter Isaacson book. He was on his deathbed, and they were trying to strap an oxygen mask to his face. And Jobs ripped it off and mumbled that he hated the design and refused to wear it. Though barely able to speak, he ordered them to bring him 5 different options, and he would pick a design he liked. Now, is it acceptable to demand excellence from everything around you as a sort of a valid trade-off for the excellence that creates the stuff that we really like? I really don't know. If you have any thoughts on this, I would love to hear them. Find me after and let me know. So once you've made something that's really good, it's time for the third thing that we can learn from Kanye West, which is to talk about yourself. So the year's still 2004. College Dropout has come out, huge success. And Kanye is nominated for an AMA for Favorite Breakthrough Artist. He attended the awards, and when another artist won the award, he actually got up and walked out of the auditorium. That's pretty intense behavior. And so they interviewed him after the show, and he gave a quote. He said, "I felt like I was definitely robbed, and I refused to give any politically correct comment. I was the best new artist this year." Now, this is a pretty egregious self-promotion. But consider, the person who took that award home that night was a woman named Gretchen Wilson. Now, show of hands, who's heard of Gretchen Wilson? All right, we had a couple stragglers. When I gave this talk in Ireland, I could see no hands. I didn't see a single hand. 2 people came up to me after. They were like, "I know who Gretchen Wilson is." I'd never heard of Gretchen Wilson before doing the research for this talk either. And so it shows that while Kanye was promoting himself, while he was hyping himself, he wasn't necessarily being disingenuous. He's being honest because he knew he had made something really good, and he wanted credit for it. Our story doesn't end there. The next year, on the album Late Registration, the song that samples a Bond theme song is called Diamonds from Sierra Leone. And on it, he raps, "I was sick about awards, couldn't nobody cure me. Only player that got robbed and kept all his jewelry." Alicia Keys tried to talk some sense in him. 30 minutes later, saying there's no convincing him. What more could you ask for? The international asshole who complains about what he is owed and throws a tantrum like he is 3 years old. You gotta love it, though. Somebody still speaks from his soul. And this bearing of the soul is what I love so much about Kanye West, because he knows that he's acting petulant. He knows what we all think of him. But at the end there, he won't let us forget about the soul music that he brought back to hip-hop. That's what that's a reference to. And there's a certain, you get a sense that what you're hearing is raw and unfiltered. There's no PR team here. This isn't a tweet that was dashed off. It's not a song that was leaked. These are lyrics that were planned and recorded and produced by Kanye over the course of months. He said this because he wanted to say it, and I would argue because he felt compelled to say it. And I think it takes courage to admit when you're acting like a child. And courage shows up in a lot of forms. Later that year, 2005, Kanye was on a telethon with Mike Myers. And if you watch the video, you can see he's really nervous. His voice is shaky. He knows that what he's going to say is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. But he knows he has to say it, so he says it. George Bush doesn't care about black people. And he got called out in the media for this. But if we take a look, history sort of proved him right on this one. The FEMA response to Katrina was inadequate, and it probably did have something to do with race. And you don't have to take it from me. They asked Mike Myers in an interview a few years later about how he felt about that moment, and he said, "I can definitively say that it appeared to me, watching television, that had that been white people, the government would have been there faster." He said that he was proud to stand next to Kanye at that pivotal moment in his life. And so I think that's the fourth lesson that we can take from Kanye West, which is to do the right thing, even when you don't have to. To do the right thing, even when it's going to cost you. In 2009, Kanye, drunk, saw an injustice. He rushed the stage. He snatched the mic from a blonde teen. Beyonce had one of the best videos of all time. And he was lampooned for this. He withdrew from the public eye for nearly a year. It was a tough time for some of us. And while we can talk about Kanye's tone or the way that he went about doing what he did, I think, again, we can't argue that he was wrong. From a technical perspective, the Single Ladies video was really, really good. And you don't even, again, have to take it from me. This is the award for Best Female Video. About 10 minutes later, the VMAs gave Best, or Video of the Year to Beyonce's Single Ladies. And so, what Kanye had seen that night, what had freaked him out and what had made him rush the stage, was another example of an institution awarding white mediocrity over excellence from a woman of color. And I don't really have a good solution for that. The world isn't optimized for us to call out injustices like that. You can either say something quietly in an interview after the show and get ignored, or you can say something loudly during the show and get mocked. And there's not really much we can do. One thing I think that is important, though, is to defend those people who risk their own reputations for other people. Now, Kanye and Taylor eventually made up. Kanye apologized. Word is they're working on a song together. And that brings me to my last point, which is to admit when you're wrong. Kanye has always been really into fashion. In an interview a few years ago with Zane Lowe, who was also mentioned in the keynote yesterday, he gave this quote. He said, "I love fashion. I loved it since age 5 when my mama brought me to a discount for a spot. She asked me what I liked, and everything I liked was too expensive for us." Now, that picture is Kim Kardashian and Kanye West's daughter, Nori West, wearing the very fur that Kanye's mom couldn't afford for him, and I think that's kind of poetic and nice. So Kanye had this dream of making awesome high fashion, and so he pursued it. He went to Europe, he interned at Fendi, he opened a little studio in Paris, but he found himself shut out. There was a lack of experience, and people who make high fashion don't tend to look like brash rappers. And so he took to the public. On his shows, he would go on long monologues about how he was not welcomed and how they stole his ideas, and he was criticized for this. People said, why do you want to make clothes that are so expensive that none of your fans can afford them? And it took some time, but I think Kanye came to the right answer with this. This interview is only from a few months ago. He said, everyone should have the good life. It's like Zara and H&M. Before that happened, you could tell who came from money and who didn't, who had a bigger paycheck and who didn't. It was about separation, and I think high fashion is about elitism and separation, and I'm completely opposed to that. Kanye saw that the thing that he wanted to do didn't match up with his ideals. And so he's still going to make clothes, he's not going to give up that dream, but he's going to do it in a more egalitarian way. And I think he came to the right answer with this. And let's not forget, Steve Jobs also famously opposed the App Store. He didn't want other people's rounded rectangles sullying his pure device. And his team had to convince him, but he came around, and now the App Store is one of the biggest parts of the iPhone's ecosystem today. It certainly gives life to a lot of the people in this room. And I don't want to belabor the point, but Kanye West and Steve Jobs have one more thing in common. Now, is this talk just about Kanye West? Yes. Do I literally think that Kanye West and Steve Jobs are the same person? Also, yes. But really, it's about challenging your core ideas. I think it's almost common from someone from this industry to revere a Steve Jobs. And it feels kind of weird when someone says that they draw strength from a Kanye West. And that's what I want to challenge. Kanye West as a person might be flawed, but he has principles of truth and nobility, and he sticks to them. You gotta love it. Somebody still speaks from his soul.